Gina Alcoholic. And thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here today. And Jackie, thanks. You were talking about how hard it is to speak to a sea of like still pictures or black boxes. I cannot agree anymore. I really love speaking. But one of my favorite parts about speaking is usually like when I'm in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous and like you can feel all of that energy and spirit. And so this past year has been interesting trying to like get into a groove on Zoom. So anyway, I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. I want to welcome everybody. I see people from all over the country. Cece, congratulations on 48 days. You're a trooper, and that's a hard place to be in. I don't know if you've been in the program before, but I was thinking about, like, would I have ever stuck with Alcoholics Anonymous if my introduction were Zoom meetings? I don't know. It would have been really hard. So I just want you to feel welcome. And yeah, so it's cool seeing everyone here. I'll dive right in. I have some time, right? I have till 2:50. So I want to share kind of a snapshot of where I was when I came into the program. I have 14 years and gosh, you guys, I'm pregnant. My brain is like half working. Coming up on 15 years, okay? July 7th, 2006 is my sobriety date. We're not going to do math right now in my head. It's not going to be good for anybody. And 15 years ago, in early 2006, on a Saturday morning, I probably would have just been like coming to. There was no like going to sleep and waking up in the morning. I was completely unemployable. So I would have probably been like coming to Saturday afternoon, probably hungover from the night before. My then boyfriend was a bar back at a bar in Venice Beach. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles and did all of my using and drinking in LA. And, I picked a guy who worked at a bar and sold ecstasy and weed. And that was my boyfriend criteria is, do you have an apartment that I can live in? And do you have a lot of drugs that you're willing to share with me? So that was my relationship criteria. And he fit the bill perfectly. I probably would have been coming to, and I think around this time, he couldn't get rid of me. People can't get rid of me. I'm like, when I was using, I was like a leech. Because I was unemployable. I didn't have any money of my own. And I have like zero white girl hustle. My best hustle is to like find other people to mooch off of. So he moved out of his own apartment that was under his name to get rid of me. And he went to rehab in Malibu, and he was like, you can stay, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. You can stay here, whatever. And we had been drinking and at the time smoking a lot of crack cocaine. And so he left, and I was like, he's the bad influence. Like, now that I have a nice place to my own, never mind, I had no plans on paying rent. I kind of knew the get down in LA. It's like, you can like stay here until the sheriffs come and escort you out, right? And that can take many months. So I had been through that process before. I wasn't scared of it. And so I was like, I'm just going to be here until someone tells me I have to go. And, I probably would have come to, and I probably would have been figuring out what I had to do to come up. There's usually some alcoholing around, and I probably would have taken the edge off with that, smoked some bunk weed or, scraped resin off of a bunch of old pipes. And then like I said, I didn't have a lot of money. So I was always coming up like a dime bag at a time. It's a pretty lame hustle. But part of the excitement for me was, cause I had no life. I had nothing else. The only thing I did was drink and use, so like running around in the streets of Venice, in the ghost town area, it was fun for me to go cop dope. That was exciting, and that was kind of what I did. So, and I did that for a couple months until July And I had been living that way for about a year. And in July, what happened was I had moved in my drug dealers. I had moved in a couple of people from the street that I knew from the corners. And I was like, you can deal from this apartment. It's not my apartment. How quickly, when there needs to be some kind of responsibility, the place is not mine any longer, right? And I had moved in some associates, and I said, look, like, as long as you kick me down and give me some, like, you can use this apartment for whatever you need to do. And I came to one morning in July, and I had, and I just felt, I'm like about 5'9". My normal weight is like around 150. When I got sober, I was around 100 pounds. Like, all of my bones were sticking out. When I got into rehab, my nickname was Skeletor, which I don't know if that like reference lands on anyone anymore. Is it some kind of comic book figure who's like basically a skeleton, right? This like evil skeleton. And that's what I looked like. My hair was falling out. My skin was this sexy shade of like yellow and gray. My teeth were rotting out in my mouth. And I was hurt, like, I just felt, exactly like the book describes, like, completely hopeless, completely devastated, incomprehensible demoralization. I think the scariest part was that I knew I couldn't go on one more day living the way I was living. And yet the idea of not doing what I was doing, not getting high, not getting drunk anymore I can't even fathom. The only thing in my life working right now is the fact that I can get drunk and check out of reality, And so this idea of getting sober was horrifying, and it seemed impossible. And I was at that jumping off place. And what I did was an infamous call to my dad. My parents lived in Santa Monica, and at the time I had a horrible relationship with my mom. And I called my dad and I said, I need you to come pick me up. And he says, I can't because you stole my car. I was like, oh, right. Right. I have your car. I forgot about I had borrowed the car without his permission for many, many days. And, he was like, I need to get to work and I need to come get my car. So tell me where you're at. And I had, he got there, he took a cab down to Venice, and I was all sucked up and toothless and crazy and hallucinating. And I met him down, probably near Broadway. And I had left, the way I had parked the car was kind of in the middle of the street. All four doors were totally open. We got into the car, and we'd been drinking Cisco the night before, and I had vomited like strawberry Cisco all over the upholstery. So it was like stained in neon red vomit. I don't know if anyone has had the pleasure of drinking Cisco, but, it was stained with my vomit. There was crack pipes that I had smashed into the dashboard. I was like, I'm never doing this again. Right. And there were some drugs left over. I was like, why didn't I just smoke that? And there was someone's property bag from county in the back seat, and there was someone's tickets for prostitution. And so I had brownouts of the evening before. I knew I was driving around with a bunch of people and getting high and drunk, but I couldn't remember what I had done. It was pretty obvious what I had done. And my dad and I awkwardly got into the car the way it was. And, we surveyed the damage, and he was like, where do you want to go? What am I supposed to do with you? And, that was everyone's question for years, because I had, at the time I was 20 years old. I had been getting high and drunk since I was 13, pretty much every single day. The second I found, the first thing I'd ever done was smoke weed. The second I ever got high, I knew that was going to be it for me. I knew I was like, this is what I've been waiting. Like, this is the only thing that's going to get me through this thing called life. And he so I had pretty much kind of gone off the deep end in high school, and I dropped out. I'd never completed high school, and I dropped out. And for the few years, from like pretty much from like 16, 17 to 20, everyone was just like, what do we do with you? I had been at that point in and out of sober livings. I had been in and out of inpatient treatment facilities, a couple trips to the hospital. I have to assume because I was young and white and pretty, I never got arrested. That would have changed very shortly, but I was lucky enough to have only been detained. And, but I could see the future. I could see what was going to happen, right? Like my parents had been forcing me to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous around the age of 17. So I had heard, at the time, 15 years ago, there just wasn't that many young people, in my perception at least, getting sober. So I would go into 26 and Broadway and hear all these old people, probably my age now or something, talking about their lives and the consequences of like 20 years of drinking and using. And I would be like, oh, but I knew that was the path, like there was no escaping it. And so in my mind, it was just like, I hope I can like drag this out and keep getting loaded through my 20s and then get sober, when I'm still cute and unscathed. And so, I did not pick my sobriety date. That's not my story. I have no control over drugs and alcohol. I'm completely powerless, 100% powerless over that. And what ended up happening was I got sick of the way I was living. My dad had picked me up that day, and he dropped me off at St. John's, a hospital in Santa Monica. And at that hospital, they didn't have a psych ward. And all I knew intuitively in this like drug-induced, hungover state, I knew that the only thing I was positive of was that if left to my own devices, right, I was going to drink. And then I knew that when I drink, I do drugs. Those two things cannot be, for me, they can never be separated. I can't have a single drink and go home. I have a drink and I end up in a crack house. I end up with a needle in my arm. That's my story. And I knew that if I was left to do what I wanted to do, that's eventually this like little moment of willingness to like get help would leave. Because I had had those feelings before. I had wanted to be sober before. And I knew they were fleeting. I knew that it would be like a matter of minutes, hours, days, when this thing would switch off in my brain, would be like, what are you doing? Why are you sober? Go get loaded. And so, and I knew walking into that hospital, I said, I think if I tell them I'm going to kill myself, they have to lock me up. I just desperately wanted to be physically restrained from using, I thought that's the only way. They got to strap me down to stop me, right? And I told them, and I quickly regretted that decision, because as soon as you tell the hospital that you're going to kill yourself, they lock you up. And so they didn't have a psych ward at that hospital, but they put me in a hospital room on a gurney, and they put a security guard in the room with me overnight until they could transport me to UCLA Carson psychiatric facility. And I was admitted. It started out willingly, did not end up willingly, but I was admitted for what's called a 5150 hold and a 72-hour hold in the psych ward. And that night in the hospital, about 10 hours in, I was anxious. I was detoxing. I was like, why would you say that? Why are you doing this? You can figure this out. You didn't need to be so dramatic. And I was sitting in that hospital room, and the security guard was sitting there, and he had been reading off of one of those like tablets, like a Kindle or something. And just his presence in the room started to irritate me. And I remember looking at him and like, what are you reading? And he told me he was reading the Bible. And immediately in my mind, I was like, oh, a Jesus freak. Great. Now, let's paint a picture here, right? I'm a high school dropout. I'm a junkie. I'm a full-blown alcoholic at the age of 20. I rob my own parents. I steal, I lie, I cheat. I'm unemployable. The last time I had been gainfully employed at the age of 20 was as a clown, a children's clown. And I would smoke a bunch of crack and shoot a bunch of speed, and I'd be completely drunk, and I would go entertain a bunch of children dressed as a clown, okay? That was the last time I had a job, right? And my name was Silly Jilly, and I literally had a clown car in Venice. It was a red bug, and it had black polka dots on it like a ladybug. And I would sit in that car and get totally high and go entertain children. Okay, so I'm 100% complete loser at life. And I'm sitting in a hospital room because I cannot stop myself from drinking. And I'm sitting here judging a man who's sitting here like reading the Bible, seeking God, showing up for work, looking after my dumb ass, right? And I'm the one judging him. Like, that is me. That is me to a T, without God. I'm judgmental, I'm critical, I'm selfish and self-centered. And the idea of anyone seeking God was just such a cop-out. I was like, oh, he must have a shitty life, And he looked at me and he said, do you want me to read to you? And in my head, I told him, I said, just as long as you don't mention Jesus's name. So ridiculous, right? I have absolutely nothing against religion or Jesus or anything like that today. But in my mind at the time, that was not a solution. I had been to those AA meetings before. I knew the whole get down and like you say you're non-denominational, but then we have to do the Lord's Prayer. I get it, right? And he reads. All I remember, he read more, but the only thing I remember him reading this thing, and it said something to the effect of like everything that you do in the dark eventually comes to light. And it hit me in my gut in a place that it sobered me like that, right? Like it was, and I had this moment of clarity sitting there, and I was like, everything, like I thought I was slick. I thought no one knew. I thought I was getting over on everybody. I thought that I was going to be able to dig myself out of this one again. And it was like, look at you. You're 20, sitting in a psych ward, And I just remember thinking like, you have no future. You have no future. And you're going to screw everything up over and over and over and over again until you try something new. And that was my spiritual experience. That was one of many, but that was my first spiritual experience, was sitting in a hospital. I'm still friends with that security guard 15 years later. He gave me a book and he wrote his name and number in that book. I'm sorry, my dog, I can't stop him. I've been to his church. My brother got sober, and he's Christian, and I introduced him to my brother when my brother got sober, and we're close family friends now. I mean, it's just, I won't go there yet, but, that was what my belief is that like you have these little moments of clarity, right? Like whatever got you to your first meeting or got you to check into rehab or got, whatever got you the first chunk of hours or days, right? There's like this tiny opening that happens, and it's God-given. It's a grace. It's a gift from God that we can't control. We can't buy it. We can't produce it or manufacture it. This grace that allows us for 5 seconds to consider the idea of possibly trying something else, right? And in my mind, it wasn't like, Gina, go find God. It was just like, I'm exhausted and I give up, and like, fine, I'll go to rehab again. Like that was the spiritual surrender. That was the first spiritual surrender. And that does not have holding power over me, right? That is not enough. My surrender in that moment was not enough to keep me going sober for 15 years. I thought it would be. I thought that's all I needed, right? Was willpower, right? For me to dig deep and like make a decision and stick to it and stop being a loser. And what happened for me was I got out of that psych ward, and I was transferred by, again, like these little gifts started like lining up. When I said, okay, fine, I'll go. Okay, fine, I'll go. Okay, fine, what do you want me to do now? It wasn't because I was excited to be sober or be in AA, anything like that. I wanted nothing to do with it. I was so devastated that like this was it. I was like, great, I'm gonna be an old boring person who's sober and losery in my 20s. Like, awesome, right? I was like, it's either this or death, you know? So like alcohol, it was like, you know, it was a tough call though. But like these little things started lining up for me where like the county at the time, LA County, had a program that if you were age 20 and under, that you could go into, they would pay for some kind of inpatient treatment center. And I went to Cry Help for 6 months in the Valley, and I hated it. I don't like authority. I don't like people telling me what to do. I didn't like the fact that we had to live with men, but I couldn't talk to guys. I was what they called on the bench all the time. Being on the bench meant you were like about to get kicked out of the treatment facility. And every time they would put me on the bench, I would sit there. I'd sit there for 8 hours, and you'd have to think about, you know, why you're messing up in rehab or whatever. And the only thing I could come up with is like, Gina, you have nowhere else to live. You know, like prior to my little stint in Venice, I had been living in abandoned buildings in Hollywood, shooting methamphetamine. So it was like, okay, where are you going to go if you get kicked out of rehab? So I stayed, didn't get a sponsor. I'll take that back. I did get a sponsor. I got 2 sponsors. Had no idea what they were for. What I understood about sponsorship was like you get a sponsor and they tell you how to live your life. You know, you tell them all the crazy thinking that you have. They tell you the better solution, or they tell you what to do about whatever crazy thinking you're experiencing. And then you just keep running your life by them, right? Like I had a vague idea that I was supposed to do the steps. But I thought the steps were kind of like ancillary, right? Like you get a couple years sober and then you do all the stuff, right? Like I can just go to meetings right now and focus on just, you know, getting sober, whatever the hell that means. I was already sober. I was in rehab. I was physically sober. And I got these sponsors that, they picked me up and they took me to meetings and they were really nice. I don't remember doing any step work with them. And I ended up getting out and I went into sober living because that was the cheapest option. Had I had a single dollar to my name, I would have got my own place and probably would have been loaded. But I was just broke enough to end up in a sober living. And I think I paid them like $150 a week to stay there. And I stayed there for another 6 months. So all of a sudden I had a year and I had not done any steps. I had been going to meetings. I learned how to smoke cigarettes. I did not smoke cigarettes when I was getting loaded. I learned how to smoke cigarettes in AA and in MA. And I got started smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, and hanging out with people and fellowshipping. You know, like, do you have a support network? Was really that big. Like, who's your sober friends? You know, and I just, you know, and it was like after a year of sobriety, it's like, okay, I'm now 21. I'm a high school dropout, and I'm working as a hostess at a restaurant. And I was like, you got to get your life together. You know, that was the overwhelming feeling I had. It was like, you know, you're a giant loser and you dropped out of high school. You never went to college. And so 100% of my focus went on rebuilding my life. And what that looked like was I got a boyfriend and a car and a cat and an apartment and a job. And I focused on rebuilding my life. And I woke up at 3 years sober. I was sober. I managed 3 years of sobriety without ever opening the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, never working a single step, never making any amends, nothing like that. I woke up at 3 years sober and I was depressed again. I was pretty miserable. And I couldn't figure out why, you know, because I thought everyone around me had been saying how great I was doing. And I was, you know, this sober, you know, like my parents were just beyond thrilled that I had that much time sober. But, you know, I never made amends. I had a bunch of secrets of things that I had done when I was running around on the streets, and that made me feel just like a total piece of crap. The whole like not finishing high school, never going to college, for me, like, you know, I wanted to be like my dad. My dad had a master's degree and owned his own business. And I was just like, you know, and all my friends from high school would come back in town during like spring break or whatever and like talk about being in college. And I'm just like, oh, I finished rehab, you know, and I just felt like this small, you know, And I couldn't pay bills on time even if I had the money. I had a great newcomer job. It started at 11 a.m. It went from 11 to 7. And I was still late every single day, even though I was within walking distance from my office. And I just was like, is this it? Is this like, this is the sober life? Like, what's going on? And a thought came into my head, or a feeling came into my head, and I now know that that was God. And it said, if you don't go back to meetings and start working the steps and you get a sponsor, you're going to drink again. And at the time, I didn't even know what an alcoholic was. I went through a whole year of treatment, had no idea what an alcoholic was or what that meant. All I knew was that if I ever picked up a drink, I wasn't sure. I was like, maybe I can manage the alcohol. But my biggest fear was like, if I drink, I might use drugs again. And if I use drugs again, then I'm done. And that was my base understanding of my first step, right? And I went to some meetings, and I found a woman who spoke with clarity and confidence, and she was beautiful, and she like had her life together, and she had a designer purse, which was very attractive to me at the time because I was broke. But she talked about like being sober and miserable at the same time. And I was like, oh, okay, so I'm not the only one who's also sober and miserable. Okay. And she talked about getting out of being sober and miserable. She was like, she had this whole story about how she had found a sponsor and went through the big book and did the steps. And I was like, I guess it's time. I guess it's time to do the steps. And if you're listening, I'm really blessed and lucky. I don't know, I believe that my life and like the way things worked out those first couple years happened for a reason. I didn't get loaded, even though I didn't work the steps. Very few people I know are able to maintain that without getting loaded, So my current, what I've seen more often than not is that the sooner you work the steps, the longer you can stay sober and the less chance you have of going out. So I'm not recommending what I did in any way, shape, or form. I miraculously survived that experiment. And so I worked with her, and it took us about a year to go, maybe a little less, to go all the way through the steps. But when I say I poured my heart into it, like I did it with everything I had. Like when she would, she told me to get a big book and to like take notes and like highlight. I mean, like, I like nerded out on Alcoholics Anonymous. It was like all I understood from her share was that there's some kind of answer here in the big book that was going to like help me live a happy life. And I was so tired of being miserable that I just, I believed everything she told me, and I just did everything she suggested. And I didn't hold anything back when I did my first, back it up. We did my third step on my knees, and I held her hands and we prayed together. Most awkward moment of my life. But I did it anyway. And then I did this inventory with her where I told her everything. And then I went out and made these amends to people. And then I started praying and meditating and sponsoring people. It got to the 12th step, and I told her, I was like, I thought I got a party or something at the 12th step. I was like, where's like the parade and balloons and presents for me doing the 12 steps? And she was like, oh, no. You haven't done the 12 steps yet until you sponsor people. She was like, the 12 steps says that we carry this message to other alcoholics. She's like, you haven't worked with anyone yet. You're on step 12, but all the work that we've done up until now so that you're in a position where you can go help another woman. You haven't done that yet. And I was like, what? And so I threw myself into sponsorship, and, I'll speed up and I'll say, so that was about 12 years ago. And I ruled like with an iron fist. My early sponsorship was a disaster. I always share at meetings that like, if I sponsored you a long time ago, like, please come up to me. I will make amends to you. Because I had this thought, I still carried this thinking around that a sponsor is someone who, that I'm up here, you're down here. It's a hierarchical thing. I have time. You're asking me for help. You're a hot mess. This is what you should do with your life. And that was kind of how I worked with people. And that's how I was worked with. And it helped to a certain extent. More often than not, it hurt people. And the people who left, who didn't want to deal with my BS and my controlling issues, you know, in my head, I was like, you know, like they're not willing. They're not, you know, never did I consider it was me. But I'll tell you what, like in those moments of controlling, and like, even though I shudder to think how I used to sponsor, I will say this, that never in my life had I just like selflessly given of my time to another person. And, you know, it really wasn't, even though there was ego involved, it wasn't on the forefront of my mind. Like I genuinely did think I was helping people. And it was the only bright spot in my life was working with people. And so I just, the more I sponsored and the more I gave of myself to other people, you know, whether that be, I really strongly encourage speaking on H&I. If you're in the LA area, I know H&I is still up and running and you can speak on panels right now. But speaking on H&I panels got me over my fear of speaking. And I realized that the more I spoke at meetings, the more people would ask me to sponsor them. The more people who asked me to sponsor them, the more connected I felt, the more useful I felt, the more, you know, the more I learned about Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, if you really want to learn something, you have to teach it. Like teaching is the highest form of learning. And for me, like sponsoring just opened up Alcoholics Anonymous and like totally changed everything for me. And in my life, I mean, I really say I have 2 sobriety dates. You know, July 6, 2006 is when I got physically sober. And February 2009 is when I started working with that sponsor, you know. And so 2009, my life transformed as a result of working with 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it continued to improve. You know, I learned things from that set of steps that was like, showing up when I don't want to show up, right? Because when I flake on people, it hurts them. And I don't want to have to make amends anymore, you know? So I started being accountable. I started being on time and punctual. I started being honest. Even when I was horrified to be honest, I started being honest no matter what. I'm sorry, can you guys hear my dog? He's going crazy? I'm going to close this window because he's going to drive me crazy. Give me 5 seconds. Okay. That's why you don't get tiny dogs, because they bark all day. You know, and so I started translating what I had learned in the step work. I started translating that into my personal relationships with men, with women, at work, with my family, and like everything, like my whole, you know, there's a line, a couple places in the book basically where it says like, the more important demonstration of our spiritual principles is in our homes, occupations, and affairs, right? It's all fine and good for you to show up to a meeting and be nice and give out your phone number. But like, are you cheating on your taxes? Are you cheating on your husband? Are you an absolute dick to your parents? You know, like, what does it look like when you leave these meetings? And I took that to heart, and I just wanted to be, for the first time in my life, I wanted to be one person. Meaning I wanted what you saw to be who I was inside. I didn't want to have to like cover up and lie and pretend I was something I wasn't, because that's what I did when I was drinking and using, right? It was like I had this like actor persona that I would present to the outside world that I wanted you to see. But inwardly, I knew I didn't deserve that reputation. I lived a secret life. And I just didn't want that feeling anymore. You know, I wanted to be free. I wanted freedom. And, you know, I'll spend my last 10 minutes sharing about, I had another huge, and I'm sure, I hope and pray, you know, like if I stay on this path, that I'll continue to have these big mind-blowing revelations. But around year 8 or 9, I started to question the sponsor dynamic I had been raised with in Alcoholics Anonymous. Meaning I had, you know, it was like if I wanted to go to God, it was kind of like you go through the sponsor. The sponsor has the direct hookup to God. You go to the sponsor first, and then you get the word of God from the sponsor, so to speak, right? And if I made mistakes, it was, the way it was put to me was like, well, you made that mistake because you didn't run it by your sponsor. And I was like, well, what happens if my sponsor gets hit by a bus, right? Like, it seems like you're depending on this human being for a lot, right? And I had this experience where she went out of town. She was in Australia. My husband, or my then boyfriend, was on a trip. He was in Texas. And I was home alone. I got terrible news from the IRS. There's never any good news from the IRS, but I got horrible news from the IRS. And I freaked out. Completely had a meltdown over, since then, I have had other meltdowns. And I laugh thinking about that's what the meltdown that triggered all of this was. But yeah, it was a letter from the IRS, and I was like, I can't call my sponsor. What do I do? And an intuitive thought came into my head, and it said, why don't you just sit in your room and just breathe and pray and meditate through it? And I sat in my room and I did the little prayer meditation practice that I had learned until I could stop crying. And I knew that I wasn't supposed to pray for the IRS to go away, but I instead prayed for the fear to be removed. It was the first time, right? 9 years sober. First time I had ever just sat down and prayed for God's help directly. And then within 20 minutes, I felt this fear leave my body. And I don't know. I look at that experience now and I'm like, God, 9 years, what the hell were you doing before that? But for me, it was deep and it was profound. And it showed me that that there was a God all along, right? And that I could go directly to this source. And it just blew my mind. And I started playing with this, right? It felt kind of dangerous. I'm not going to call my sponsor, what if I get quiet and pray and meditate and maybe write this out and see what happens? And I started doing it more and more. I eventually left that sponsor, and I did eventually get another one, but my new approach, I call it my new approach, the way it's kind of outlined in the book, is more about, I do this thing with other alcoholics shoulder to shoulder, right? There is no hierarchy in Alcoholics Anonymous. My sponsor doesn't run my life. I don't run my sponsee's life. I try not to give direct advice anymore on individual issues because I'm not God and I don't know what the hell you should do. I can help you point out some helpful spiritual principles you might want to give a go. But in general, it's I really worked hard when I left that sponsor. I had to really work hard to cultivate this inner intuition that it talks about. On page 55 in the book, it talks about, we want to be spiritually liberated, meaning we want to be lifted above our problems, rise above our problems. If you live in the real world, right, problems always, all the time, constantly, you can't escape it. I hate to burst any new person's bubble. Life is not going to be easy just because you got sober. But the difference for me today is that I've been able to rise above my problems, right? And I can stay connected to God and feel strong and grounded in this faith that I'm going to be taken care of, even when everything around me does not indicate that, And on 55, it goes on to say that there's a fundamental idea of God deep down within every man, woman, and child. It's inside of you. So it was I didn't have to go out searching for God. It was it's blocked. I'm just blocked from the God that's already there, right? You dig up all the stuff that's blocking you from God through inventory, through amends, through prayer, meditation, and then you get access to this belief, right? I had a belief in God, but I had never had direct experience with relying on that power. And I'll wrap up by sharing that in December of 2019, at that point in my sobriety, I was 13-ish years sober. I'd made amends to my family long, long ago. I had this incredible relationship with them. I had my mom, she's had several surgeries. She's living with me right now. I've taken care of her. I wash her. I feed her. We have this beautiful relationship. My whole family unit has been restored through Alcoholics Anonymous. My middle brother got sober 5 years ago, and we do Alcoholics Anonymous together. He's my spiritual rock and my guru. At 5 years, I go to him. And in December of 2019, my youngest brother had a really horrific seizure, and he died suddenly and tragically. And he went into a coma, and I moved in his hospital room. I packed a bag and I moved in his hospital room, and I watched him die for a week. And we took him off life support on December 18th of 2019. And I'll tell you what, if I didn't have that direct connection to God, right? If I had not discovered that I could go inward, and that through prayer and meditation and inventory work and staying connected to this source, right? If I didn't know that I could go and tap directly into that power to carry me through things, I don't know that I would have made it. You know, like family is my number one today. It has been for many years. Very dysfunctional family, but we love each other a lot, you know, and my brothers are my heart. They mean everything to me. And I was very, very close with my youngest brother because he was the only person in my family who never got mad at me when I was using. And losing him has been devastating, right? Like I can't even talk about it without crying. But I'll tell you what, like I've never, ever felt closer to God than that week that I spent in the hospital with him. Because my intuition, right? Like I told you where I came from, you know, like I smoke crack until my teeth fall out. You know, I'm unemployable. I'm completely spiritually bankrupt when I'm out there, right? And flash forward 13 years and I'm walking through the hardest thing I've ever walked through in my life, watching my baby brother on life support. And like my head told me, it wasn't anything about getting high. It was like, be here with him now. I'm going to take care of everything. Just be here with your family. And like, that didn't come from me. That didn't come from me, right? It came from this power that I got connected to by doing the steps as outlined in the book. And since then, right, 2020 turned out to be another shit show. You know, like it has been the weirdest 18 months of my entire life. I'm pregnant. I'm 7.5 months pregnant, feeling all 7.5 months right now. And so I'm like hormones also, you know, like the crying, the hormones, like I'm all over the place. You know, but I just want to wrap up by saying that there's no way that I could have built the life that I have now, right? Where I'm like a business owner, I'm a wife, I'm a soon-to-be mom. I have my mom living here with me. I'm taking care of her. I'm connected and I feel the presence of God. I don't feel like I'm lacking anymore, right? I wake up in the morning, I'm not miserable because of what I did the day before, and I'm not fearful of what's happening what's coming up in that day, right? I'm just like, I wake up, for the most part, I'm happy. I feel whole and content and connected. And I didn't know that's what I wanted when I got sober. I just wanted to stop wanting to die. I just don't want to feel like this anymore. I had no idea what the opposite of that feeling. I had no reference point for what that could possibly look like on the other side, right? So my phone number is, I put it next to my name. If I can be helpful to you, please take my phone number. Please don't be scared to text me or call me. I still love sponsoring, and I'm not a Nazi sponsor anymore. So, being with other alcoholics and helping people really is the bright spot of my life. And, if I could just reach out to everyone and just share what I found in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the freedom that I've experienced as a result of dedicating myself to this work. That's just my number one goal. So if you're sober and miserable, or if you're newly sober, if you just want something different, you just need to talk to somebody. I put my phone number there for a reason. It's not just to look cute. Please take my phone number and give me a call. And thank you so much for listening.